Hey Theater Addicts, I'm Melody Owen. I'm here with James Walter Charleston, aka Jim C. He is the playwright and the one-man act doing Redemption here at Vancouver Fringe Festival, and he is at Studio 1398. How are you today?
Doing well, Melody.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Tell me a little bit about your Fringe experience. Have you done Fringe before?
I have. I started out in Asheville. I did St. Louis, Indianapolis, Tucson, and San Diego. And it was great fun just traveling across the country.
Awesome. Now, what's your favorite part of Fringe as an artist?
Well, as an artist, it's seeing all the different shows, the different performers, and getting to know those local performers and people from all over the states. It's just a whole lot of fun.
Yeah, awesome. Now, talking about shows, your show, can you tell me a little bit about the story of your show? How did it come to be?
Okay, so after my wife died in 1990, I was left to raise my daughters on my own, and I advocated for them for 30 years, teaching them how to, be aware of their surroundings and to always think about safety and to have an out, to trust their gut. If, it didn't feel right, then, to extricate themselves from that situation. And then in 2010, when they'd both been off at college for a while, I realized I wasn't going to be there anymore for them. I couldn't always be there to help protect them. And I saw a statistic that UN Women had released that said 1 in 3 women would be either sexually or physically assaulted during their lifetime. And that statistic had not changed in over 20 years. And I knew right then and there that I had to do something to help bring about a world where any woman could go anywhere at any time without fear. Not just for my daughters, but for everyone, because it's systemic. I mean, it's a huge problem. So that's how I started out doing the Fringe show. I started out by doing a short film where 2 therapists who weren't happy with the rehabilitation results, they abducted and forcibly rehabilitated a sex offender. That got like no interest whatsoever. So I started this solo show, and I worked with my producer Vivian Nesbitt and said, I want to do a solo show. And she said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, sexual assault prevention. I didn't even have to think about it. I just boom. So we worked on the show, and I worked with Christine McHugh, who is my director. And one of the things that I did when I was doing the research is that I found that the first rape crisis centers were created by a black woman in the late 1800s called Ida B. Wells. And it was in response to the rapes done by slave owners. So I fashioned one of the characters in honor of her, Ida B. Wells. I play a black woman therapist in this show. Now, that's really hard for me to do, so I hired one of my local actors in Albuquerque to help me find my inner black woman, and I still haven't found it. I tried, but I still haven't found it.
Tell me a little bit about the rehearsal process. So you're playing these 3 different characters, and it's a one-man show. How do you rehearse that?
Well, yeah, it's kind of an interesting process because, like I said, getting into the black woman, I have to find my center and project my chest out and to think really dainty and kind of do that, and just to have those kind of mannerisms and I it's not an easy thing for me to do. I have to be really cognizant of it, but putting my fingers out and doing stuff like that. So the bureaucrat is stereotypical male. He's just real confident, kind of arrogant. He doesn't have any idea that someone can have a different opinion than he does. So that one's, that's kind of how I do that one. Now the offender is, that was a really interesting one because one of the things that, the questions that I've been asked is how come there's not a victim in this show? And the thing is that the offender is a victim who doesn't get the type of modeling that he needs to actively develop healthy intimate relationships. So I portray him as a damaged person. So being, kind of reluctant to talk about his abuse, but needing to. So we get into that a little bit, and it's just really interesting to do all 3 different types of characters.
Yeah.
To give them all a voice.
Sounds really interesting. Now, I have to ask, you play a woman who is black, who is a therapist, who has been a victim of sexual assault. Yet you are a white male, and we think of sexual assault, we think of rape as a women's issue, as a really personal, intimate women's issue. And so when I read about the show, I immediately wondered, how do you do that? How did that feel? How does it feel to kind of walk in those shoes? And do you consider it an intimate women's issue?
Oh, I do. I consider it an intimate women's issue for sure. But it's also a man's issue too, because men can be sexually assaulted. Now, in my instance, I am the victim of abuse by a woman. And there's a whole kind of history that goes on with that I had to be raised in a certain way, to find myself in the place where I could have a woman telling me what to do and forcing me to do things that I didn't want to do. Some of the scenario that I have Mary play in this is from my own experience.
I think that's a really go see this. So the show name is Redemption, and I know that I think we all need redemption. I know if there was no redemption, I'd be in trouble. And so it's a really interesting concept. And I want to ask you about redemption. Like, why did you name it Redemption? What does this mean to you?
Well, the interesting thing about this is that if we're going to discover how it is that offenders become offenders, we have to actually talk to them. We have to talk to them and understand, what situations they had in their life, in their upbringing, who modeled healthy relationships, who modeled sexual relationships with them. We have to understand and talk to them. And one of the things, when a lot of people think about sex offenders, they think about monsters, and nobody wants to have a monster in their backyard. So they don't understand what the warning signs are. They don't pay attention to it. They just say, okay, let's put it over here. That's not affecting my life. I don't need to deal with it. But we need to understand. We need to have this discussion in our homes with our families, and it's got to be open and accepting. That's the only way that we're going to really figure this out and come up with ways to prevent it, because everything that we do as far as sentencing, monitoring, apprehending, registering, and tracking the sex offenders does okay for us to know who they are, but it doesn't stop that from ever happening in the beginning, and that, I think, is what we need to do.
So the original name was not Redemption. What was it, and tell me a little bit about that.
Okay, so the original name was We Call Them Unredeemable, and the reason I changed it is because that kind of denotes that it's about a sex offender, and nobody wants to go see a show about a sex offender. They just didn't show up. Nobody showed up. So the interesting thing, like I said, is that we have to talk about the offender. We have to understand how he got to be the person that he is, and then that way we can change it. So by thinking in that term, I changed it to redemption, and it kind of points to that that basis, is that understanding how they get to be where they are, and then implementing programs or education or whatever it is that we need to do will bring about redemption and hopefully an end to sexual abuse.
So I hear there's a podcast that's around this topic. Would you give us a...
Yes.
Tell us about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as part of this whole process, I decided that it might be helpful for survivors to tell their story. As a long-time card-carrying member of Al-Anon, I realize, how important 12-step programs are. So I searched the internet for a Survivors Anonymous program and found one for sexual assault survivors. And I set up a meeting. It doesn't happen very often because it's hard to get people to come to it and talk about their problems. But I've got some podcasts out there where there are some survivors that tell their story. And it's really, really a powerful thing. I know that the survivors that have been a part of that have talked about how important it is, how hard it is to tell their story, but how important it is to get it out and to be heard, in hopes that there are other survivors out there that will benefit from that.
Anything else you want to tell our audience before we sign off?
Well, the one thing that I'd like to say is that this is a really sensitive issue. This is a show that's really hard hitting. If you don't feel this at the end of the show, then I don't know what to say, because it is just really, really kind of stunning in a lot of ways. It's something that we have to talk about. We just don't talk about it. And in my opinion, it's something that we need to talk about in our homes with our kids. We have to help them learn how to be empathetic of other people, of other people's situations. And I think that's the only way that we're going to be able to bring an end to sexual abuse.
Thank you, Jim. I'm here with Jim C. I'm Melody Owen from Theater Addicts. Go see Redemption at Studio 1398, Vancouver Fringe 2018. See you there.
So one final thing, I just want to let you know that half of the proceeds from all of the shows here at the Vancouver Fringe Festival for Redemption will go to the Battered Women's Support Services and Women Against Violence Against Women. So come out and help bring an end to sexual assault.